Hello and welcome to the test screening. I'm Billy.
I'm Chloe. We're two film school graduates and cinephiles who can't seem to get enough of the big screen.
So now we're bringing you our weekly insights into the biggest releases, hottest topics and forgotten classics every Monday.
Welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And I'm Billy.
We've got another jam-packed episode. Going straight into it, so we started our first episode talking about BAFTA nominations. And we've got two lots of nominations to talk about today, Billy. We've got both the Oscars and Razzies. For those who don't know, what are the Razzies, Billy?
They are essentially the antithesis to the Academy Awards. They are the Oscars for the worst films, the biggest misfires of the cinematic year.
Do you think that the films nominated for the Razzies this year deserve Razzie status? Do you think they are the worst?
Oh, absolutely. The clips I've seen of Pinocchio and Morbius are pretty dismal. The one that maybe stands out as being, if you were to look at it from afar, you might not necessarily think of it as being, a really cheap, wonky, poorly made film, is Blonde. It kind of seems like a very artsy, glitzy, prestige drama from afar, but actually, as I'm sure we'll get to talk about in a moment, it's incredibly problematic. It's a lot, yes, it's a lot.
Blonde is a lot. We'll go into it in a second. I mean, some of the highlights, some of the Razzie highlights for me, is both the 365 Days sequels, which are basically 50 Shades of Grey.
Stockholm Syndrome, the movie with a hint of BDSM.
Right. When I first saw this shows how tired I am at the moment, right? Because when I first saw the titles 365 Days sequels, my mind instantly went to the film about the guy who gets his hand trapped under a rock.
127 hours.
And in my mind, I was like, surely they didn't make a sequel. That guy didn't get his hand stuck under a rock again.
He got the other arm.
He's
no arm there.
And he was stuck there for a whole year this time, a whole 365 days.
You want to survive that long?
Hey, I thought that's why it was in the Razzies. I was like,
oh yeah, that would check out, to be fair, considering the other noms.
Yeah, and then I actually looked it up and I was like, oh, soft porn, fair enough. That makes a lot more sense than what I thought it was. Some of the other things that I think jump out at me. I mean, there's obviously been quite a bit of controversy about Firestarter, the young actress that was nominated for a Razzie, and I kind of tend to agree with the public opinion that he shouldn't have been nominated for a Razzie.
Yes, really good, solid child actors are hard to come by. That's not necessarily like, a criticism of, a lot of child actors. It's just it's a hard job and it's hard to pull off well and convincingly at such a young age. And, not all children, are fully capable and fully cemented in those acting shoes right away. So they might be still finding their voice, finding their feet. So yeah, it's not really fair. And also part of the whole shtick with the Razzies is that it's supposed to poke fun at kind of the pageantry and the very prestigious, exclusive Hollywood image and cliquiness of that. And when you're older and have a much more established place in the industry, you can take sort of a verbal and online beating a bit and see the humor in it. A kid isn't really going to get that.
Yeah, and I think there has been like a formal apology released about that, which I think is the right thing. There are a few that I full-heartedly agree with. I agree with both Tom Hanks nominations, which I didn't think I would. I think Tom Hanks is genuinely, he's usually pretty solid. What happened?
Yeah. He's one of the most reliably solid actors, I think, in the industry. Not necessarily putting in, groundbreaking work all the time, but you can count on him putting in the goods for us. But especially in the case of Elvis, I'm like, what was going on there with the really hokey accent and
It was weird.
and just the strange sort of happy-go-lucky, but also kind of sinister mannerisms and vocal qualities. Yeah, just very strange, weird combination of like caricature, but also like pantomime-esque villain. Yeah, wasn't really vibing with the decisions made there, and the makeup is also very suspect, as proven by the worst screen couple nomination for Tom Hanks and his latex-laden face and ludicrous accent in brackets for Elvis.
Let's go on to the Oscar nominations. The other side of the coin. There are a few that are, expected. Yeah, I think with these Oscar noms, like some of the films that we reviewed last week are on here, like Tar. We've talked about Banshees of Inisherin and Everything Everywhere All at Once. We talked about those in our overview of the BAFTAs. There are a few on here that raised some eyebrows for me, and I wanted to know if you had the same reaction.
To which one specifically?
Can you guess?
Top Gun Maverick? Triangle of Sadness? Elvis?
Okay, Elvis, you know my opinion on Elvis. We're not going to go there. I think the one was a best lead actor, Bill Nighy for Living.
Oh yes. Now that doesn't hugely surprise me because he had gotten a little bit of awards love across some of the circuit for it. I do quite like him in Living. I mean, my opinion on Living overall is that it's a far inferior and kind of, neutered retelling of a far greater Japanese film from the 50s. But he's quite understated. He's playing against type. He's very kind of meditative. It is quite a subtly emotive performance in that. But even my colleague who I was speaking to the other day who liked Living more than I did, even he was like, best actor, bit overkill.
The other one that surprised me, I mean, I'm not mad about it, but I was surprised to see it up there, was Glass Onion. I enjoyed Glass Onion. I just don't think it's best adapted screenplay material.
Oh no, I do. I do. I think the hard flip it does in the middle, the way it totally pulls the rug out from you in the middle and kind of changes the context and direction of the story is so sharp and so smart. And I think it's even more of a satisfying puzzle to put together and watch unfold than the original Knives Out, actually. No, I was very happy that it was included in there. I wasn't happy about the Living nomination, but
I wasn't mad about it. Like I loved Glass Onion. I really enjoyed it. But then you've got like the whole twin thing, and there's some of it that I thought was really astute and really clever and sharp, like you said. But then there's also a lot of it which I preferred what they did in the first one. I think I was like I would have been happier to see the first one. Did the first one get nominated for anything?
I think it did for original screenplay.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I feel like that's a better fit for me. I'm not sure if I would put Glass Onion in Best Adapted Screenplay. There were a few things that I was just like, it was either a little bit of a pacing issue or the whole twin thing, which was a bit eye rolling to be perfectly honest. But the rest of it, I did honestly, I really enjoyed it. So I'm not mad.
There were a few head scratches for me. I wasn't expecting Triangle of Sadness to get, as much love as it did. I wasn't really a fan of that film. I thought it was kind of overlong and, thematically kind of thin and ponderous. Again, the Elvis love, apart from his performance, I just don't get it. Best foreign film, I really thought Decision to Leave was going to get a nom, considering Park Chan Wook and his standing within the industry, his past filmography, and the fact that it had gotten several nominations across the circuit for best foreign film. But I think I said in our last week's episode that I was underwhelmed by it. So actually, to not see it feature in that category was actually, I think, a win in my book, despite other people complaining about it on social media. The Quiet Girl, which is an Irish language film, which we don't get very often, that getting a nomination for Best International Feature Film was such a joyous moment for me. I was so thrilled that that film has been recognised. I might actually need to go back and rewatch it and sort of rethink my 2022 top 10, and maybe see if that has a place in there. Also, Paul Mescal for After Sun nearly fell off my chair in the office when I saw that.
Nice.
What a fantastic performance by him, and just proof that he's one of the most exciting actors of the younger generation. And whilst I would have liked to have seen After Sun get more awards love, I'm super chuffed he's got a nomination for that. Most criminal snub of the night, nothing for the Woman King. What is going on?
Yeah, no, that's yeah. Again, like I said last week, I'm sure I would happily have the Woman King over anything that Elvis has got on this list, truly. Also, things like Avatar: The Way of Water. Any awards outside of Best Visual Effects, give it to the Woman King. Please give it to the Woman King. I just don't think it deserves accolades personally.
Mm-hmm.
But that could just be me.
Yeah, I think maybe just one thing last thing I'd like to mention about this, just the nominations in the best picture category is just how, I mean, as much as I don't agree with a lot of the choices, I think it's wonderful that we've got such a varied best picture category. I mean, you've got an epic war film with All Quiet on the Western Front. You've got two visual effects laden, action-packed blockbusters with Avatar and Top Gun. You've got a very deep, psychological, very weighty, bold drama with Tar. You've got a wildly original, genre-bending, action, comedy, drama, sci-fi film with Everything Everywhere All at Once. You've got a kind of glitzy biopic in the form of Elvis. You've got two quite subtle, restrained, subtext laden, very heavy character dramas with banshees and women talking. You've kind of got a satirical takedown of, social class with Triangle of Sadness, and then you've got the Fablemans, which is basically Oscar bait incarnate. If you look at it on paper, which we will, I'll get onto my deeper thoughts about that one later.
I mean, I agree. We have got a nice mix of genre and film in here. We still, I mean, it's no revelation to say that the Oscars has a diversity problem. We know that the Oscars has a diversity problem,
Big time.
but it is like again just another frustration where we know that there are more fantastic films being made by women and people of color that come out every year, and they still don't get the representation that they deserve in these categories. I mean, obviously, to get into the Oscars, you have to run a campaign. You have to run a successful campaign, and it is the Academy votes, and I just can't help but think that because we're still not giving the budgets to support directors from different ethnic backgrounds or women, a lot of them are still struggling their way through the indie scene,
Mm.
and perhaps not having funding to really splash out on a decent Oscars campaign. We're not gonna see them in lists like this unless have that extra in the budget, and I think a lot of them are just happy to be able to get their stories told and get things made. So it's a little bit frustrating. But that being said, there are still some things that I'm happy to see on here. It's just another year of looking at same kind of faces, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, a couple, good steps forward, and some ones that are kind of just eye rolling and how obvious and set in their ways they are.
I guess on the bright side, the Razzies does look quite similar in terms of how many like middle-aged white men are nominated. So at least I could take some comfort in that.
Yeah, even out the playing field.
We'll just take them out one Razzie at a time. I didn't actually plan to do a full review of this film. It was just that I was watching it um, before we did this, and also it's been nominated for a Razzie, and it's also got an Oscar nom for its leading lady. So I'd really like to talk a little bit about Blonde.
Mm. I think we both have very strong opinions on this film.
Why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on Blonde, and then I'll jump in.
Well, I mean, to just briefly sum up, I absolutely loathe Blonde for for a number of reasons. I mean, looking at it from afar, you can see that it's very visually impressive. You know, these very kind of technically impressive recreations of the famous photos that represent key moments of Marilyn Monroe's career. But when you actually dive into the narrative and the story and what it isn't saying about Marilyn Monroe's life, you just see how incredibly problematic it is in its representation of her. I mean, a lot of things have been said. No secret has been made about it, the fact that it's not a traditional biopic. That being said, we are dealing with the life story of a real person, and I do think that some serious disrespect issues have come about as a result of what has been changed, altered, and ultimately fabricated in this retelling of Marilyn Monroe's life. And I think just in the end, Blonde amounts to nothing more than, you know, a really voyeuristic, you know, grossly intrusive and, you know, thematically empty victimization of a woman who was received some terrible treatment in her life, but clearly had a lot more to her personality wise than the shell that is presented on screen. And I can kind of see the point and the intention with trying to rawly and realistically and bluntly portray a, you know, a serious mistreatment by, you know, a patriarchal society, you know, a toxic, you know, industry with with Hollywood, and how that has really poisoned and brought down this woman's life. You know, the two massive issues then are, one, a lot of the abusive scenarios that are portrayed in Blonde are completely fabricated and not historically accurate at all. And two, at what point when we are, you know, showing that abuse over and over and over and over and over again for 2 hours and 40 minutes, you know, without giving any sort of depth or complexity or examination of everything that occurs around that abuse and that woman's personality, her own feelings about it, her own turmoil, and who she is and her voice. You know, when we're completely sidelining that, at what point are we just perpetuating that narrative of victimization? You know, and that to me is the central thing that makes, you know, it doesn't justify Blonde's existence, one, and two, makes it a really pernicious and I think hateful and nasty piece of cinema, even if that wasn't necessarily the intention.
I had kind of mixed feelings about it at the beginning because I can't fault it for going for the 18 rating. You know, if someone who had like such a troubling upbringing and life, you know, I can't blame a film or a piece of media for trying to put that across honestly. But it's like you said, the problem is it is not honest. It's a fabrication. It's based on a work of fiction, um, based around the life of Marilyn Monroe, which could be initially like an interesting concept. I mean, when I first started watching it and I saw what it was doing with the aspect ratio and it's trying to replicate some of these images, and I thought that could be quite an interesting idea. You know, we see the image, we see what the world sees, and then we go behind mask in theory to find out what's really going on and how this woman is being exploited and the story behind the image, essentially the fact that Marilyn herself is image, and surely the aim of the film is to get to know Norma Jean. Like you said, is it's a barrage, like an absolutely relentless barrage of abuse. Um, and we're never truly invited into Norma Jean's world. We don't get to see behind the mask. It's actually at one point, which is absolutely appalling, really, really hard to feel empathy for her because you just kind of become numb to it. You just kind of switch off in a way, and it's really difficult then to get back inside her mindset. We're always kept at arm's length, as we've always been to Marilyn Monroe's life. You know, it doesn't do anything new. It just kind of tells us about the exploitation that we already knew, and then adds more to it. It's just really bizarre. Also, womb cam. Can we talk about womb cam?
Oh, Lord have mercy.
What's going on with? There's
Oh,
just like
so
these bits in the film where we see inside Marilyn Monroe's womb when she's pregnant, and we see her CGI baby, and I think that was the point. It was at that point I was just like, I don't know what I'm watching anymore.
it was at that point that you checked out.
I really did. I checked out. I checked out when the baby started talking to her and all sorts. Prevenge came to mind. I don't know if you've ever seen that film about the
Terrific film.
woman who becomes a murderer because her unborn child is telling her to kill people. It's very weird. And yeah, I guess what we never really seem to learn the story of Marilyn Monroe. We see it with celebrities these days. Britney Spears, Amy Winehouse, all of these women who were and still are put under the microscope to be analysed. They're either exploited by the press at the time, or they're made a martyr for lessons that we as a society never seem to learn. And we never hear their voices in any of it. It's always outsider's perspective, looking in and making judgment. I think what is really interesting, I mean, I guess if one good thing came out of Blonde, it was I learnt that Marilyn Monroe actually wrote a memoir called My Life. And this has made me want to read that and actually hear her story about her relationships in her own words. So I think in that way, it has made me want to. It's made me want to seek out her voice in all of that.
Yeah, that's a very positive outcome. I think if anything, something that was very reassuring to me, reading a lot of comments online, like on YouTube on the trailer for Blonde, was how there was almost this rallying cry against Blonde and what it's saying and its narrative approach to her life. And it was heartening to see how many people just saw just how hideous the manipulation of the facts in her life and how reductive not putting forward her own voice and personality and positive aspects was.
Should move on to our first actual review. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. It's very fresh. The wound is very fresh
Oh,
from
it is.
Blonde.
It is. I only watched it last night.
Yes, I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about it way into the night, maybe giving it more thought than it actually deserves. Um, but I think let's keep on we're going to keep with a bit of a theme actually on this whole old Hollywood train and talk a little bit about Babylon. And when I hear Babylon, I can only think of the Lady Gaga song.
I think that song is probably more entertaining than this overall film. I'm sorry, but the vibes are not going to get much more positive from
Oh
here going into
dear. I mean,
the
Babylon by
Babylon
Lady
review.
Gaga is a bop, so I'm guessing that Babylon, the film, is I'm quoting here, not a bop.
I can't think of a word that is the opposite of bop. But
It's a flop.
but yeah, yes, a very aggravating flop at that.
It's not a
So
bop, it's a flop.
indeed. So the plot of Babylon, in as much as it even has a plot, if you can call having a bunch of like really excessive, over choreographed, irritating set pieces, a plot, is that we have three kind of very thinly drawn Hollywood archetypes one of which is Manny, who has come to uh, the titular Babylon, Los Angeles, the Hollywoods, to work in the film industry. We have Nellie Leroy, played by Margot Robbie, who's this very vivacious, loudmouth, very larger than life prospective actress who's trying to break into, do anything she can to get a role on screen. And then we have Brad Pitt as Jack Conrad, who is an established Hollywood actor, his career is going strong at the start of the film, but as we progress, we maybe he starts to think maybe his time in the limelight is fading and that his, star power and successful career is starting to dwindle. These three ideas is nothing we haven't already seen before in the film. Thematically and story-wise, does very little with it. There is almost nothing in the way of interesting character development in this film, or anything that kind of doesn't reek of cliche of Hollywood dramas in the past. The film in general is just so devoid of anything substantive to say about Hollywood or the changing of the industry or any sort of corruption of moral values or anything like that. I was talking to Marianne recently actually, and she said about how we were saying how it would have been far better if Manny, for example, had come into the film as being this bright-eyed, optimistic, idealistic guy who romanticizes Hollywood and the film industry and the way it works, and then is slowly corrupted by the debauchery and the seediness that is, that occurs under the surface of all the work. And I guess he does become harder edged as the film goes on, but he doesn't really, he's not really given enough of a personality for it to be all that engaging. The actual experience of the general mood and actual experience of watching Babylon, the closest thing I can equate it to is being strapped into a human-sized slingshot and fired between two large concrete walls so that you then hit and rebound between both of those walls for just over 3 hours. It is that senselessly extravagant and pummeling. The film is sometimes technically impressive and visually kind of awe-inspiring. I say sometimes because outside of these large-scale film shoot sequences, the camera movement goes so unbelievably haywire. It feels like the operator had cocaine shot directly into his veins prior to Damien Chazelle calling action.
Is he at the same party as the cinematographer of Elvis?
Yeah, literally. But like these exhausting whip pans and crash zooms and frenetic editing, that make Elvis seem slow, are just flung around with such reckless abandon that it makes the use of split screen and Elvis seem like a sensible and nuanced directorial decision. It's hard to put into words how obnoxiously bombastic and full throttle Babylon is, and to the point where I was completely exhausted and aggravated before even the 1 hour mark. You can imagine how much I was losing the will to live by the 3 hour mark. The few times the film does slow down and try to offer something even remotely resembling an actual story or character portrait, it becomes glaringly apparent that the screenplay has staggeringly little to offer in the realm of thematic material or insights into the changing film industry or the ramifications of its excesses on the characters, how it negatively affects them. It also doesn't help that it's kind of billed as an epic comedy drama if you Google it, but it has absolutely no sense of comedic timing. In the opening sequence where they're trying to bus an elephant up a hill in a desert, the elephant really unceremoniously, explosively defecates directly onto the lens. And this is just thrown in with no sense of a punchline or comedic timing, that it's like, oh, that's just gross and, unexpected and yuck. Why is that even here? What response is that supposed to elicit humor from me or a laugh? Comedic sequences are either dragged out or elongated to such an extent that by the end, you're so annoyed and impatiently waiting for the punchline that when it finally does happen, you're like, oh yeah, all right, they finally came, and then, by that point, any sort of humor has been sucked out of it completely, or the gag and the punchline is thrown in so prematurely into the sequence that it punches you around the face, and it just doesn't. The impact is about as flaccid as it could possibly be, and and in the longer sequences, any comedic tension is just wrung dry. There are brief flashes of the poetry and the insight that was present in La La Land. There's this quite surprisingly beautifully written lament in how appearing in a film gives an actor immortal impact that will reverberate through future generations, that one character says to Brad Pitt. There's a piece of meditative piano scoring, Margot Robbie drifting into a side street, shrouded in darkness. It's kind of metaphorically her fading into obscurity. But even most of these sequences are soured, by another shot of debauchery, occurring soon after, or a scene, for example, at the end, a montage that is quite beautiful to begin with and emotive and, is quite loving and reminiscing montage of cinema and watching a movie and what the memories that brings back. But then it's stretched out with this really eye-popping, explosive montage that just sucks the soul that had previously been built up in that scene. Now, this is all these issues I previously mentioned are compounded by the fact, probably one of the biggest issues I had outside of the frenetic pace of it is the tone. The closest thing in terms of extravagance I can liken Babylon to is The Great Gatsby and The Wolf of Wall Street. It doesn't have the stylistic panache or the emotive, elegant deconstruction of the American dream that Gatsby does. And it doesn't have the devilish charisma or self-awareness to poke fun at how ridiculous the behavior is, like The Wolf of Wall Street does. There's, profane verbal abuse is fired off with the rapidity and force of like heavy-duty artillery gunfire. Gags are attempted to be squeezed out of crew members dying on set due to, inhumane working conditions, women being beaten, overdosing on drugs, suicide. The visuals are dingy and pessimistic in these sequences. The really kind of deep sepia tone of the lighting. The characters are endlessly morose and hateful and bitter. It's one thing for a film to be ponderously pretentious and bloated. It's another thing entirely for said film to revel in that chaos with the intention of being enthrallingly entertaining, whereas actually it just reads as venomous, mean-spirited, and morally bankrupt. Yeah. Can you tell I hated this film?
Yeah, I kind of got that impression about halfway through, to be honest. Yeah, not a fan.
No, not a fan. D, straight D. I was thinking a
D,
D
okay.
minus, but then I thought actually there's a few flashes of subtlety this had in it. Made me bring it up from that grade. But even then, like I said, those moments are soured.
Okay, well, let's swiftly move on then. Let's not let let's get away from all of this misery.
Yes,
And
please.
the Fablemans. I've actually been quite excited for this one.
Me too.
I'm a massive Spielberg fan, and I think I enjoyed West Side Story. But other than that, I don't think it's been a while since I've had anything from Spielberg that really feels like a Spielberg movie. Even BFG was a bit lacking for me. So, does this capture that old Spielberg magic?
Yes and no. So The Fablemans is Steven Spielberg's long-awaited kind of very autobiographical, very personal tale of really his upbringing and his formative years being inspired and wanting to pursue the dream of being a film director. And the people who helped nurture that interest and his stylistic points of inspiration and his kind of reconciliation between his family life and his artistic goals. And given what titan Steven Spielberg is in the film industry, it's yeah, it was hotly anticipated to sort of see his deconstruction of that. And there are some obviously very heartening, wonderfully moving sequences of Sammy Fableman, who is essentially the Steven Spielberg stand-in, shooting his films, and sequences that capture that collective wonder and communal excitement that cinema can bring. Just laughing reactions and reactions of shock and joy at watching Sammy's films when he projects them at the local cinema. There's this sense of vitality and action. It aligns us with his commitment to the art form, and also an affection that all his family members have for his talent as a filmmaker. And that's particularly heartening when you consider it in the context of Spielberg's wider career. There's also some very nice examinations of how filmmaking can reframe traumas, it can reorder and re-edit life, it can help us process our emotions and seismic life events, and it can teach us a lot of things about how to handle those and help us provide catharsis for those emotions. There's a couple of scenes where John Williams' very beautiful, gentle, introspective score pairs with moments of Sammy sitting with his mother, for example, and viewing home videos, which are very tender and very lovely and quite moving. There's also a good scene where there's some image distorting lenses and dramatic angles used to demonstrate how Sammy films a toy train set, for example, to replicate a train crash from a film he saw at the cinema, The Greatest Show on Earth. I think in the end, it doesn't really dig into any of these themes beyond a fairly superficial retelling of them, which I think is a shame because that does read to me as quite a big missed opportunity. I feel like, they're very kind of lovely as surface level examinations, these scenes, but they didn't really have any deeper sort of message or thematic meaning to me beyond their kind of surface level meaning. There is kind of a lot has been said about the ending. It does have an absolute cracker of a final scene that it's razor sharp in its humor, it's lively, and it's kind of winking to the audience's love of cinema, and it's a fitting and really heartwarming conclusion to the story. There are two quite big aspects of The Fableman that kind of hold it back for me, sadly. First is the general tone and feel of the direction. Last week when I reviewed Empire of Light, I didn't review that particularly favorably, but one thing I did say was really great about it was how Sam Mendes' passion for the titular cinema setting and the process of watching a film and the filmmaking process, it just radiated off the screen, just emanated so palpably. This doesn't really have that. Strangely, the feel of The Fableman, especially when you consider the magic that Spielberg's usually able to conjure, it's kind of measured, it's muted, and it's almost bland in places. It does have those engaging moments I mentioned previously, but at best, those scenes only really reached a small fraction of the poetry of the best scenes in Empire of Light, and I really wanted it to have more of that feeling, especially considering the subject matter. The other quite big issue for me was the family drama, really. I mean, taking any sort of the real life context out of it for a second, there's a central love triangle that feels very contrived, and it didn't really feel dramatically weighty enough to support that part of the narrative. The family drama in general that forms the other kind of narrative backbone of The Fablemans doesn't really hang together with enough depth for me to either kind of deepen the cinematic themes or really carry the film and keep it completely interesting for a 2 hour and 20-minute runtime. It does feel padded out, and sometimes the stretches of the runtime are given to sequences of friendship or certain relationships that that Sammy does form that ultimately end up feeling inconsequential to the overall narrative arc of him coming of age and becoming a filmmaker. Also, just an aside, there's Judd Hirsch has received a Best Supporting Actor nomination for what is essentially an extended cameo. He must have 8 minutes of screen time max, and strangely, his teachings and his presence, it's never mentioned or referred to again. The impact of him can't really be seen in Sammy any later in the film in terms of his character development. And honestly, his like rampant scenery chewing and like extravagant, physicality and physical gestures, I found more obnoxious than endearing. And his presence kind of just smacked as a plot contrivance to me, rather than a fleshed out character. So I think I'm probably making The Fablemans out to be worse than it actually is. I think it's solid overall, and the family drama is delivered serviceably. It just overall, the film in general feels like a cinematic footnote to Spielberg's career. It doesn't feel like a particularly weighty piece of work, but overall it is solid, and I did really enjoy parts of it. So I think overall I would say a B. Nice, good, solid, but not that shattering, and I was a little bit underwhelmed by it.
Well, when I go and see it, I'm going to make my own mind up because I
Yes,
feel
please
like
do.
this is, I feel like this is one of the, out of films that are out at the moment, this is the one that kind of appeals to me most, even if it's just out of a pure nostalgia from watching Steven Spielberg films as a kid. I think E.T. like left an imprint on me.
Oh, me too,
As a
absolutely.
kid, I feel like if you watch E.T. when you're little, I think it just does something to you. And I feel like Steven Spielberg is one of those directors that in your life if you ever go into film. I feel like Steven Spielberg's had a hand in a lot of young people wanting to pick up a camera and become filmmakers. So I'm looking forward to seeing it and kind of seeing the story behind the man. On a little footnote, as a little bit of um me and Billy, I tried to get Billy to watch Angels in America, which is a one of my favourite plays of all time, and they've got the recording up on National Theatre Live. And the writer, the co-writer of the Fablemans and Steven Spielberg's long-term writing partner is Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America. So
Same writer, fantastic. That's
it's the same writer. So there you go. There's a
that's
little
very
tidbit
interesting.
for you.
Love it, love it. Love Angels in America.
Let's go to a documentary. And you've literally just seen this. What, like a
Yes.
couple of hours ago?
Yeah, I saw it today, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. This is a documentary by the director Laura Poitras. She made Citizen 4. She won Best Documentary Feature for Citizen 4. It was a documentary about Edward Snowden, very kind of taut and thriller-like and very kind of throbbingly intense. Terrific documentary, would highly recommend if you haven't seen it already. All the Beauty and the Bloodshed follows the life of this very influential, impactful photographer and artist, Nan Goldin. And it contrasts her past life and her growth in the artist world as this really powerfully emotive storyteller with photography of the LGBTQ community, sexual liberation, the intricacies and nuances of sexual and romantic relationships. She did this very famous and revered slideshow called The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, which shows those ideas in photographs that I've just mentioned. And then it also shows her present, recent efforts to protest the Sackler family's hand in the opioid crisis. They're the pharmaceutical dynasty that essentially marketed and distributed OxyContin, I think it is, which was shown in the Dopesick series on Disney Plus, if anybody saw that. So it contrasts her artistic influences in her previous life with that present day very urgent social issue and her protests against that. I thought this was a really terrific documentary. The sequences of the protests, kind of like throwing around, throwing around pharmaceutical pill canisters and prescriptions into famous museums like the Guggenheim and the Met in New York, and also playing dead with like fake gravestones and blood-stained money. These are really extraordinary protests and very, very powerful, and are captured with the same sort of taut thriller-like intensity and handheld camera work and raw in the moment energy that Citizen 4 had, although obviously this is a lot broader in scope subject matter wise, and we're not constrained to the hotel room setting like we were for the bulk of Citizen 4. So that part of the film is very urgent and compelling. And the section around her life that is and her previous artistic work that is then woven in is also very, very interesting. There's some wonderfully evocative photography that's shown. I mean, large portions of the film are just slideshows of her photography with her talking over them, and I think it's a really great decision for the most part to let those photos and what they say about her life and her artistic vision and her own emotions speak for themselves as she is talking over them through her in voiceover from her interview. If I have a slight reservation about that, I do think that the handheld camera work is so in the moment and so grabs you by the lapels and pulls you along in those protest sequences and the present sequences about pharmaceutical protests. Sometimes with those very long slideshows in those sections about her artistic work, the pacing can suffer a little bit. It can become a bit languid. And at times it can feel like both sections of the film are happening in a bit of a vacuum earlier on. But I think towards the back end, her own feelings about her life, like her relationship with her sister and her mother, and then what she tried to show through her art and how that has affected her opinions around the present pharmaceutical issues. That's then brought into the fold and threaded through her protests and her activism in a really powerful way. There's a couple of very moving sequences towards the end around the amazing social changes and legal battles that ended up resulting from her work. And yeah, some of it's quite hard to watch, and but it's very, very pertinent to some issues we're facing now around money and social class. I thought, considering the breadth of this subject matter, Laura Poitras was able to capture it with a very comprehensively and with a lot of detail. And but yeah, I just thought it was a fascinating portrait of an artist and very pertinent social issues. Yeah, I thought this was a terrific documentary, even with some slight pacing issues. I would give it an A minus. I think it's very, very good.
Nice one. We're going to move straight on from All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, and we're going to go into Holy Spider, which I don't know anything about. I must have missed. My eyes must have skimmed over this when you first showed me the list, because I was just like, Holy Spider? What is Holy Spider? It does not sound like a film that I'd enjoy, Billy. I'm not a spider. And are there spiders involved in Holy Spider? I mean,
I
I'm
guess
guessing there are.
well, no, the spider is actually metaphorical.
Can deal with the metaphorical spider. I can if they're if they stay
Yes.
metaphors, that's fine by me. It's the physical spiders that come. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. Well, actually, the subject of the film isn't much lighter, actually.
I
Sadly,
mean,
we're on for a very happy episode today in terms of
yeah, I'm just gonna
yeah.
play Mad World over the entire episode, and we can all
Hello, darkness,
cry
my old
together.
friend. A bit of Simon and Garfunkel, Sound of Silence.
Yes.
Get
Oh
those
yeah.
bad
Let's
vibes
just create
going.
a real depressing playlist for the backdrop to this episode. Anyway,
Definitely.
Holy Spider. Tell.
So this has been on general release very recently and is going to be on movie from the 10th of March. Curated streaming service. Would highly recommend getting a subscription to that if you can. It's
Sponsored.
really, but it's great. I saw this initially actually as part of the London Film Festival screenings last year, and was really impressed by it. It's based on a true story. It's a true life crime thriller. It's about an early 2000s case it's set in the city of Mashhad in Iran, and it's essentially based around this. I think it was in 2003. This murderer, this serial killer, was basically horrifically dispatching sex workers during nighttime in the. I mean, the film's set in Mashhad. I'm not sure if that is the actual city in which the real life case occurred, but I believe it was in Iran, and how Holy Spider then traces this female investigative journalist that comes into Mashhad to investigate this case, and also traces the killer and the social constructs and ingrained misogyny that sort of the journalist came up against, and her battle and dogged determination to bring this horrific killer to justice. Now, one of the most immediately intriguing aspects of Holy Spider is how it utilizes a structure reminiscent to me anyway, of the 1988 Dutch thriller The Vanishing, in that the identity of the killer, the villain, is revealed very early on in the narrative. You kind of get this dual narrative between the journalist and the murderer. And for a good chunk of the story, they're given fairly equal weighting in terms of screen time. Now, this is advantageous for the film for a number of reasons. For one, it pits the two of them against each other in a kind of cat and mouse game and a race against time kind of situation, because we're seeing the killer carrying out his crimes as the journalist is trying to seek him out, and we feel the two closing in on each other more palpably as the film progresses, which then ramps the tension up considerably when we feel the capture may be imminent, but it almost also simultaneously generates fear because we're worried for the reporter, because we know the full extent of the danger she's potentially walking into and what could happen to her in this situation. So the moment to moment, I don't want to say generic, but the moment to moment, procedural crime thriller that we may be more familiar with as an audience is kept suitably thrilling because of that structure. The film also balances a quite terrific blend of Iranian-style social realism with the genre filmmaking. You know, the dialogue scenes in the daytime with the journalist and the various law enforcement and political figures. It kind of reminded me a lot of Asghar Farhadi's directorial style. You know, famous Iranian director who's won the best foreign film Oscar a couple of times. In the nighttime scenes of the killer stalking women and dispatching them, the style takes on a more horror influence quality. There's this kind of leering male gaze like perspective the camera takes as it stalks the eventual victims, you know, bending around corners as though weaving through the city's like intersecting streets in this metaphorical web cast by the titular, you know, holy spider, the man who uses his, you know, has this ingrained hatred of women, but uses his, you know, religion as a way of justifying that. This and this actually spaciously chilling and lawless, foreboding atmosphere of the city, you know, reminded me of that the similarly genre-bending Iranian film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which is a terrific film, and I love the fact that it invoked that. The cruelty visited upon, you know, women in this film is very, very unflinching and blunt, and the fact that there was this horror influence combined with the social realism, showing that this kind of this horror movie-esque, almost slasher film-like scenario is occurring within a very real world context, and it grounded that for me, and that made it all the more disturbing and frightening. And the quite passive social realist cadence to the filmmaking and the more dialogue-driven sequences, and the film eventually becomes a courtroom drama, that cadence to those scenes as well, and also the killer's home life, it mirrors the passivity of the society and the feeling of numbness and the lack of care for women in this society, you know, the back seat they take and how little they really care about this about the women and these sex workers who are being, you know, abused and killed. You know, there's lines in it about, you know, well, of course they wouldn't capture him, you know, he's cleaning up the streets. You know, the misogyny in the dialogue in the film is really quite horrifying and incredibly pertinent as to when I saw this film. You know, we were right in the midst of, you know, the protests in Iran around the mistreatment of women, so very, very timely as well. And this sense of, you know, this coldness and bluntness in how the sexism is communicated, you know, and also this implication that that cycle is destined to repeat itself, you know, is really, it permeates the back half of the film in a really eerie and chilling way, and it results in one of the most chilling final sequences in recent memory. You know, this video camera footage, God, it just sent chills down my spine. Really fantastic way to end the film. If I have an issue, it's that I do feel there's a disparity in the character development between the murderer and that of the reporter. I mean, showing how seemingly normal and restrained the killer is, and then showing his burgeoning hatred of women, starting in the family home, you know, with his wife and daughter, and then using his religious values to veil his misogyny and justify his horrific crimes. That's all very important and vital to the social commentary of the film. In the case of the reporter, while she does have agency, you know, she takes charge and has a lot of determination, and, you know, through her own resilience and perseverance, breaks this case. You know, not that much detail is given to her background, her prior life, and her motivations that drew her into this situation. I happened to be in the same screening as a colleague of mine, and I had an interesting conversation with her and one of her friends after the screening. And her friend made this interesting comment about how you can only have so much autonomy in a society like that, and how the film may have been trying to portray that. And I went, well, that's a very valid point. But I think for me, I feel like this can be shown without disservice to the reporter character's agency, or neglecting to give her a distinct personality. That being said, Zara Mir Ibrahimi's performance, I mean, she won the Best Actress award at Cannes, it has such a quietly fierce inquisitiveness, determination, and steely reserve, whilst not sidestepping her fear and vulnerability, that for me the lack of a built-out background for her character didn't end up bothering me as much as I think it could have done had the performance not been as strong. Also, one last point, The score is amazing. It's so unbelievably foreboding and menacing. It makes the music in actual horror films look quaint by comparison. These cavernous black holes of unnerving and distorted apocalyptic ambient noise. They sound utterly hellish. But they never become overwrought so as to sound campy or fantastical. It truly sounds as though to be present in this city is to walk through a waking nightmare. Danger and hatred like pulsating through the ground and burning to the surface. And these soundscapes build to these commandingly sour string rushes that just pin you in your seat and reminded me of a more measured and grounded but equally evocative use of horns in Hereditary's climactic moments. That was sort of what it reminded me of, but it was unique and distinct in its own right. Yeah, I thought this was a really terrific, very disturbing and very kind of harrowing at times, but also very socially important and very gripping true life crime thriller. I would give this an A minus. I thought this was very good. I would certainly seek this out on, if it's still on release somewhere near you, or when it comes on Mubi on March 10th. I would recommend this.
Great recommendation. Right, so we're on to our final film pick. We're going to be talking about a man called Otto, or in the Swedish version, the previous version of the film based on the book A Man Called Ove, about a really bitter and sour old man who lives in this community. The best way that I can describe him is that he gives off the vibes of a local village Facebook group. No, he's like, oh, you can't park there, you can't drive here, you can't trim your bush like that. He's incredibly picky about everything that goes on in the community, and he makes sure that people knows it. He's got no qualms in, telling people how badly he thinks they are running the neighborhood or doing, and he is, he's lost his wife, he's grieving, and after being let go of his job, he is basically at the end of his tether. His wife was incredibly important to him, and he kind of promised her that he would follow her after she died. So, with all of this kind of building up, Ove decides to take his own life. However, he finds it incredibly difficult to do. He makes several kind of suicide attempts throughout the film, and each time something in the community, either a neighbor or a task or somebody new or an animal, a cat, distracts him from the final push. And each time that he attempts to take his life, we also get these flashbacks into Ove's life, the man that he used to be, what kind of led him to this point. And there's also a sense of humour about it, which I really enjoyed. It's like I said, that whole grumpiness can be quite funny and endearing at times. The main actor, the main actor, Rolf Lassgård, he imbues this character with such heart, and you recognise him. You recognise him in the people you know in your life. You recognise him in people you may have met in your community. And I think the real triumph of this film is how empathetic makes this man, who I think in this day and age, we automatically dismiss as, oh, okay, boomer, like you have got no, out of line, you're out of touch, don't want to hear from you anymore. And I think what this film does so brilliantly is it kind of brings it back to the human in him and why he is the way he is, and the hurt is inside of him, and how these little things, life is worth living for the little things and the little interaction. The one thing that I think I struggled to grasp with were some of the flashback scenes in which we see that Over's had an incredibly difficult life, and it's kind of to the point of excess. It seems, it gets this man has been so unfortunate, it becomes almost funny in a way, because any nice moment you think that this guy's having, you're like, oh, and then a bus is going to crash into the window, or a hurricane will happen, or you like, there is no kind of joyous moment in this man's life that isn't instantly ruined by some kind of impending disaster, which can actually make it quite a slog to get through, because while there are moments of levity and of joy and humour, they are few and far between, and they don't hit as well as you might like them to, which I think at times makes it a little bit difficult to get through the film, because it's a slow burn. It's about, life and this older guy who's, trying to find meaning in his life again, which is not, it's a good concept for a film. It is slow. It is slow moving, and unfortunately, those moments of levity don't quite do enough to pull it out of the darkness that it sometimes finds itself in excess. So my rating for A Man Called Ove would be a C. And I mean, would you agree?
So, actually, it's interesting because I have similar feelings. I'm glad you mentioned that about the flashbacks, because that is my main issue with Ove. I think overall I gave both films a B minus because, broadly speaking, I don't think either is particularly noteworthy. I think their ideas about becoming a better person and, living for the moment, finding a new lease on life, I think they're too broad stroke and in the end too superficial to be all that engaging or all that edifying, theme wise. But I have to say I did prefer Otto slightly more to Ove. In the case of Ove, the issue I had with that was that, like you said about the flashbacks, they just read to me, especially like what happens with his dad. They
Mm.
read to me as melodramatic and unearned, and that then made the script's foundation for his character to be very rickety. It's hard to empathize with an arc that doesn't feel like it should have logically developed in the first place. The melodramaticness of some of these past events and just, the kind of the relentless tragedy after tragedy, for me, it undermines the character arc at a bedrock level. Just one last point on Ove Otto, sorry, the remake that I thought was noteworthy. It does a really good job of tying the past and present together very dexterously. It intertwines people and objects from Otto's past into the present with wonderful grace. How he's kind of in his present life, he's living in those memories and in those moments, and how those can kind of sort of contribute to his grief, but how in the back half of the film it kind of influences him then to make a positive change in his life and maybe change his ways. And it was very emotionally stirring in the way it kind of like blurred reality there, and and it made for many of the film's most moving moments. There's a kind of ill-advised use of Kate Bush's "This Woman's Work," and I adore that song. But in the case of the scene it's used in, it was kind of right on the borderline of being overly sentimental. But I think for the most part, its judgment of how far to push that emotiveness is quite well placed. But yes, I think overall I would say I preferred, even though I don't particularly think either is particularly impactful. I would say I prefer Otto over Ove. It works more for me.
Really? Can you please give me a recommendation for a film that doesn't make me want to, walk into that sweet night and end everything? Because we've had a pretty depressing slew of films at the moment, and I'm just like, this is the first day I've been working. I've been working pretty much every day consecutively for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, oh, I've got a free day today. I can watch I can watch some of the films that Billy's put on his list. Alas, I've got A Man Called Ove, Blonde, and then I topped it off with the first episode of The Last of Us. So between the
Oh
three of them,
dear.
I am fully ready to have a heart attack and die. So, any gentle recommendations to help our listeners to recover
I've
from
got
the
I've,
emotional trauma?
I've got the perfect one, Turning Red.
Turning Red. Oh, I actually love that film.
Turning Red is fabulous. I'm sure in the coming weeks, as we get close to the Oscars, we will
maybe do a rundown of our favourite films of last year and some honourable mentions and stuff, I think I would love to give some time to talk about what makes, I think, Turning Red one of the best Pixar films in recent memory. I think it's terrific and certainly a big
I
pick me up.
agree. Well, now I know what I'm watching tonight. After we finished, I'm putting Turning Red on, and I'm gonna forget. I'm gonna try and forget Blonde. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yes.
Try and
Leave
wipe it
that
from my
one
memory.
in the
The
memory bank.
cuddly red panda. That's what I'm gonna do. That sounds like a fantastic idea. And what is on the agenda for next week?
So we have a satirical, kind of bleak, but also kind of winking, self-aware Bulgarian thriller called January. We have full-blown machismo action film with Plane, the Gerard Butler film. We have Brendan Fraser's likely Oscar-winning performance in The Whale. Saint Omer, which I don't know a tremendous amount about already, but I'll certainly dig into that next week too. And I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston biopic that I've been eager to see considering the director's past work.
So thank you to everybody for listening to today's episode. Please give us a follow on Instagram where you'll be able to see all the things that we've been watching and going to be reviewing, and including some little clips from our upcoming episodes. And with that, good night everybody. Bye.
Bye.